The date was May 23, 1861. Just a month earlier, the state of Virginia had passed its Ordinance of Secession, making it the 8th state to secede from the Union. The Civil War was in its infancy, and 3 young men were discussing their fate. Each of these 3 men, Frank Baker, Shepard Mallory, and James Townsend, were slaves who had been forced into service by the Army of the Confederate States of America in furtherance of its war efforts. They had been working on fortifications designed to provide protection for Confederate encampments. Each man was concerned that their slaveholder, himself a Confederate colonel, would send them further south to work, far from what they called home, and perhaps even to be separated from their families. These men developed a bold plan. They stole a small boat and made their way across the James River to Fortress Monroe in what is now the city of Hampton in southeastern Virginia. These young men had no idea what fate awaited them as their bold plan unfolded. They were eventually presented to the newly arrived commanding general of the fortress, Major General Benjamin Franklin Butler. After a brisk interrogation by Butler, the men were sent away. At that time, their fate was far from clear. Not long after the interrogation was concluded, the next part of the drama unfolded. The owner of the 3 young men, Confederate Colonel Mallory, dispatched Major John Baytop Carey to inquire about General Butler's intentions. Did General Butler intend to return the slaves to their rightful owner as required by federal law? The law regarding fugitive slaves was clear. The right of slave owners to the expeditious return of escaped slaves was an integral provision of the Constitution of the United States of America. Subsequently, in 1850, Congress had promulgated the Fugitive Slave Act. Taken together, the state of the law must have seemed apparent to the Confederate colonel and his emissary. General Butler most certainly would have the 3 young men returned to their owner without delay. But such was not to be the case. General Butler was a shrewd New England lawyer who was widely known in his home state of Massachusetts to be a master of the common law and a formidable litigator. Of course, General Butler was well informed about the constitutional law implications of the situation he confronted. But he also knew about a doctrine of military law that was implicated as well. During times of war, enemy property that could be used in furtherance of the conflict was subject to seizure. Just as one belligerent had the right, under military law, to seize armaments, ammunition, and other tools of war to prevent them from being used by the other belligerent, so argued General Butler, the Army of the Union had the right to retain the 3 young men, thereby preventing them from being returned to the Confederates to resume their building efforts. This theory, known as Contraband of War, soon gave rise to a new name for the escaped slaves. They came to be known as contrabands of war. Although this phrase ignores the humanity of those individual men, women, and children to which it was applied, the phrase became a popular one and was to become a watchword for those who longed for freedom. Scarcely 12 months later, what had begun as a slowly increasing number of those seeking legal asylum grew to tens or perhaps even hundreds of thousands of people who sought their freedom from the indignities and atrocities of slavery. It is in this way that Fortress Monroe became America's freedom fortress. On November 1st, 2011, President Obama signed another historic proclamation. Pursuant to authority invested in him under the Federal Antiquities Act, President Obama declared Fort Monroe to be a national monument. A statement on the White House website summarizes the historical significance of the fort. Fort Monroe, a historic fort in Virginia's Tidewater region, played a pivotal role in the history of slavery in the United States. Built between 1819 and 1834, Fort Monroe has occupied a strategic coastal defensive position since the earliest days of the Virginia colony. It was the place where Dutch traders first brought enslaved Africans in 1619. During the Civil War, the fort remained in Union possession and became a place for escaped slaves to find refuge. Fort Monroe was the site of General Benjamin Butler's contraband decision in 1861, which provided a pathway to freedom for thousands of enslaved people during the Civil War, and served as a forerunner of President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. We hope that you have enjoyed this review of an important part of our nation's history. I am Assistant Professor Gloria Whitico, Regent University School of Law.